In the winter of 1933, a sharecropper family on the edge of a Mississippi cotton field kept 4 children alive on one thing that grew free in the wet ground behind the cabin. Every few days, the mother walked out with a basket and dug up the small, wrinkled brown tubers that sat on the tips of the roots. She soaked them until they swelled, roasted them over the fire until they turned sweet and oily, and mixed the ground meal into whatever thin pot of beans or cornmeal they had left. The same plants came back every spring without anyone planting a single seed. Neighbors along the bayou dug the same tubers. Every poor household that knew the ground did. Today, you could walk into any American garden center, ask for the seed by name, and get a blank look. The seed racks do not carry it. Your county extension office will hand you a leaflet that tells you how to kill it. The grocery aisle has never heard of it. But here's the part worth sitting with. The plant did not die out. On a few hundred hectares outside one Spanish city, farmers still grow this exact same plant on purpose and sell every kilo before it even leaves the soil. The United States Department of Agriculture still keeps the seed. It is still growing wild in ditches and wet fields across most of the country. So how does a root that once fed families through the leanest winters of the Depression become a plant that more than a dozen American states will not even let you grow? Here is what that plant is. It grows almost anywhere the ground stays damp. A stiff, grass-like sedge with a stem you can feel is 3-sided if you roll it between your fingers, topped in late summer by gold-brown seed heads. Under the ground, on the tips of its thin roots, it grows those same small tubers, hundreds of them on a single plant. You have almost certainly walked past it. You may have pulled it out of your own lawn and thrown it in the bin, cursing it. This is the tiger nut, chufa, Cyperus esculentus. And that is the whole strange story, because the same plant answers to all 3 of those names at once, and which of those 3 names you reach for decides whether you are holding a delicacy or a banned weed. Tiger nut fed Egypt for something like 6,000 years. It still fills the bottle of Spain's most protected summer drink, grown under a government seal outside Valencia. And in the United States, the very same species sits on noxious weed lists, its seed banned from being shipped into more than a dozen states, and in California, it is against the law to plant it or sell it at all. One plant, fed to a pharaoh, bottled under a government seal, and outlawed as a weed, all at the same moment in history. Hold that, because the reason those 3 things are all true at once is the entire point of this video, and it is not the reason you are expecting. Start with the thing almost nobody tells you, because it is the key that unlocks everything else. The tiger nut you would grow for food and the weed your extension office wants dead share a single Latin name and almost nothing else. Over thousands of years, farmers in Spain and North Africa pulled a tamed version out of the wild one. Botanists call it the variety sativus. It barely flowers, it almost never sets a living seed, and it pours all of its energy into a tidy cluster of big, sweet, low-fiber tubers close to the base of the plant. It stays where you put it. The wild plant it came from does none of that. It flowers freely, it drives long runners out in every direction underground, and it packs the soil with hundreds of small, tough, bitter tubers that let it take over a field. That gap between the two is the crack the whole story falls into, because American seed law was written to stop the pest, and it cannot always tell the tame food apart from it. Go back to where it started. The tiger nut is one of the oldest foods we can put a name to. In ancient Egypt, it was eaten roasted, eaten boiled, ground into flour, pressed for its oil, and sweetened with honey into those offering cones on Rekmire's wall. It shows up in tomb inventories, in offering lists, in the diet of the living and the dead, across a span of time so long it is hard to hold in your head. Those tubers turned up in tombs dated from the 4th millennium before Christ to the 5th century after it. That is a plant staying on the menu for the better part of 4,000 years. Now be careful here, because the internet gets one thing about this plant badly wrong, and you have probably read it. You will see it claimed that tiger nut was eaten at a site called Wadi Kubaniya 16,000 years ago, which would make it one of the oldest plant foods ever found anywhere. It is a great story, and it is the wrong plant. When archaeologists actually identified those charred ancient tubers, most of them turned out to be purple nutsedge, Cyperus rotundus, a close and bitter relative, and not the tiger nut at all. Hold on to that relative. It comes back later, and it matters for your safety. The story that is solid runs through Egypt, and then it runs to Spain. Tiger nut came into Spain during the centuries of Arab rule, and it took hold in the wet farmland around the city of Valencia. They ground the tubers, mixed them with water and a little sugar, and made a cold, sweet, milky drink. In Valencia, they call it horchata de chufa, and there is a written recipe for it in a Valencian cookbook from 1324. There is a local legend that a young girl once handed a cup of it to a visiting king, and when he asked what it was and she told him it was milk of chufa, he said back to her, "This is not milk, this is gold." Whether or not any king ever said that, the Valencians took it to heart. They have grown tiger nut in that same stretch of ground for something like 1,000 years, and they have never stopped. So how does a plant like that end up on an American blacklist next to leafy spurge and Canada thistle? Here is the mechanism, and I want you to notice that it is not a conspiracy. It is a root. The wild tiger nut is built to survive almost anything you do to it. Every one of those little tubers is a loaded spring. It can sit dormant in the soil for years and then throw up a whole new plant. Pull the plant out of the ground and you leave the tubers behind, and they grow back. Till the field and you chop the runners into pieces, and every piece grows back. There is a figure from agricultural research from a study by Tumbleson and Commodall back in 1962, and once you hear it, the whole problem makes sense. One single tuber, left alone for 1 year, can produce 1,900 new plants and nearly 7,000 new tubers. And those tubers stay alive down in the soil for more than 3.5 years. A patch of it creeps outward more than a meter every season. Now drop that into a vegetable field. The wild tiger nut, under its weed name yellow nutsedge, has been measured cutting crop yields by somewhere between 16 and 89%, depending on the crop, and it can take a watermelon field down to almost nothing. That is why weed scientists rank it among the 16 worst weeds on the entire planet. Not the 16th worst in America, in the world. Watch what that same trait does to the rest of the story, because it is about to explain everything. Because the very buried tuber that fed a pharaoh is the reason an American farmer cannot get rid of the thing, and that is the reason the law finally came down on it. When a plant is that hard to kill and that good at wrecking a field, states do the obvious thing. They try to stop it spreading. And the simplest way to stop a weed spreading is to ban the sale and shipment of its seed. So that is exactly what happened. Under the seed laws that most states run, tiger nut, listed under its weed name yellow nutsedge, is a prohibited noxious weed seed in more than a dozen states. You cannot legally ship the seed into Arizona, Colorado, Connecticut, Georgia, Michigan, Texas, and a long string of others. And a few states went further than the seed. Michigan's noxious weed regulation lists Cyperus esculentus by name, and it spells out that this means both the seed and the tubers, and it bans selling or transporting either one anywhere inside the state. Back in 2005, the Michigan Department of Agriculture found that some stores were quietly selling the tubers as wildlife food, and it told those retailers to pull the product from the shelves and ship their stock back to the supplier. And in California, the state lists it as a noxious weed and says it as plainly as a government ever says anything. It is not legal to propagate or sell this species. That single sentence is what makes the title of this video literally true. In California, you are not allowed to grow this plant. Now hold that carefully, because this is exactly where most videos on a channel like this would lean in and tell you a story about some shadowy company that buried a miracle food to protect its profits. I am not going to tell you that, because it is not what the record shows. Nobody outlawed tiger nut to keep it away from you. Nobody put out a warning telling you not to eat it. What actually happened is duller and truer than any cover-up. The wild form of the same plant became one of the worst weeds on earth, impossible to kill because every buried tuber grows back. So American farmers spent more than a century fighting it instead of eating it. The tame food crop it might have been never paid better than corn, so almost nobody bothered to plant it. And a food that fed the ancient world quietly dropped out of the American mind. And here is where the story turns, because if you cannot sell the food, you can absolutely sell the cure. The same stubbornness that made tiger nut worthless as an American crop made it a permanent, renewable market for the people who kill it. Walk down the weed killer aisle and you will find products built specifically to fight nutsedge. because the ordinary lawn and crop sprays just bounce off it. One of the common chemicals is called halosulfuron. In the yard, it gets sold under names like sedgehammer. On the farm, the same active ingredient turns up as permit and sandia. There is a whole small industry devoted to killing this one plant, season after season after season, because it always comes back. And lately, the plant has started winning. In just the last few years, scientists have found populations of yellow nutsedge that have evolved resistance to the very herbicides designed to control it, in rice fields in Italy and in peanut fields in Georgia. Sit with that for a second. We took an ancient food, decided it was a weed, built a chemical industry to erase it, and the weed is now beating the chemicals. That is the modern American life of the tiger nut, in 3 sentences. It is not a crop. It is a target, and it is winning. Step outside the United States, though, and the tiger nut is not a weed at all. It is a business. In Spain, the tame chufa is grown on about 500 hectares of protected farmland around Valencia, under an official designation of origin, the same kind of legal protection Europe puts on champagne or on Parmesan cheese. Spain turns out something like 5 million kilos of dried tiger nut a year, and roughly 90% of it carries that origin seal. Most of it becomes horchata, sold on what feels like every corner through a Valencian summer. Go south into West Africa, and it is bigger still. Nigeria is one of the largest tiger nut producers in the world. It grows across the dry north under the Hausa name aya, eaten straight as a snack and blended into a drink they call kunun aya. Nigeria's own Raw Materials Council has said the crop could be worth more than 20 billion naira a year to the country if it were properly developed. And Nigerian tiger nut is already being shipped out to Europe, to Asia, and yes, to the United States. And that is the part that should stop you cold. The bag of tiger nut flour sitting in an American health food store, the small one that costs real money, while a whole sack of wheat flour costs pennies, was very likely grown in Spain or in Niger, shipped across an ocean, and sold back to you as an exotic imported superfood, in a country where the same plant is growing wild in the ditch behind that very store, and is illegal to plant 2 states over. You would think somebody in America would have started farming it by now. For the most part, nobody has. So what about the superfood part? Is any of it real, or is it just an old food wearing new marketing? Here is where I have to be careful with you, because this is a plant people make big health claims about, and the honest answer is more interesting than the hype. Start with what the tuber measurably is. When you press the oil out of a tiger nut, that oil is mostly oleic acid, the same single fatty acid that makes up most of olive oil. By laboratory measurement, it runs between roughly 65 and 76% oleic, and olive oil runs around 62 to 75. So the chemistry of the fat really is close to olive oil. That is a fact about the oil in a test tube. It is not a promise about your body, because nobody has fed tiger nut to a room full of people in a controlled trial and measured what it did to their health. The tuber is also genuinely high in fiber and in resistant starch, the kind of starch that feeds the bacteria living in your gut. That much is plain composition, and it is real. Then there is the claim you have definitely seen, because it is all over the internet: tiger nut as an aphrodisiac. In the Middle East, it carries an old nickname that translates roughly as the seeds of men, and it has been used as a folk sexual tonic for centuries. That is a traditional use, recorded for a very long time, and a tradition is all it is until somebody tests it. Somebody did test it after a fashion. In a study published in 2015 in a journal called BMC Complementary and Alternative Medicine, researchers fed raw tiger nut powder to male rats at a dose of 1 to 2 grams for every kilogram of body weight, every day for 30 days. Those rats showed more sexual activity and measurably higher testosterone. That is a real result. It is also a result in rats, eating a heavy daily dose of the whole ground tuber, and a rat is not a man. Nobody has ever run that trial in people. So the honest version is this: there is a centuries-old tradition, and there is one suggestive animal study, and there is no human evidence at all. Anyone who tells you tiger nut is proven to do anything at all for a man is selling you a rat study as if it were a prescription. One more thing. On the other side of the ledger, because you deserve the risks along with the promise. Tiger nut is usually gentle, but it is not risk-free for every single person. There are documented medical case reports of people having genuine allergic reactions to it, including one case of anaphylaxis traced to tiger nut milk. It is rare. It is also real. If you have never had it before, treat your first taste of it the way you would treat any brand new food. Now hold all of that carefully, because I owe you the part that does not flatter the story, and here it is straight. If you wanted to bring tiger nut back as a serious American crop tomorrow, That same miracle root is the very thing standing in your way. Remember that one tuber that becomes nearly 7,000 in a single year. In a backyard food plot planted for wild turkeys, that number is a gift. In a working cornfield, that same number is a disaster, and it is the same tuber. The plant did not fall out of American farming because it was fragile or because someone hid it. It fell out because it was too strong to control and too cheap to ever beat corn on price. Any farmer who has spent a summer fighting nutsedge is already nodding or already typing it into the comments. So where does all of this leave you, standing in your own yard or your own kitchen right now? A few honest, practical things. First, before you get any big ideas about growing it, check your own state's law, because this is the rare plant where that sentence is not just a formality. In California, it is flatly illegal to plant or to sell. In more than a dozen states, you cannot even have the seed shipped to your door. Those laws exist for a real reason, that field-wrecking wild form, and they do not care one bit that the tame kind is better behaved. So the law comes first. Second, if you just want to try it as food, you do not need to grow a thing. You can buy the tubers, whole or ground into flour, from ordinary online sellers, and most of what they carry was grown in Spain or in West Africa. Two things are worth knowing before you eat them. Dried tiger nuts come rock hard, hard enough to crack a tooth if you are careless. So you soak them in water for a few hours first. They swell to about 3 times their dry size, they soften, and they turn sweet and chewy, somewhere between an almond and a coconut. That soak is not optional if you like your molars. Third, if you ever go looking for the wild kind growing free, this is where that bitter relative from earlier comes back. The tiger nut's wild cousin, purple nutsedge, Cyperus rotundus, grows in the same wet ground and looks almost identical to it above the soil. The way you tell them apart is underground. A true tiger nut makes a single round tuber at the very tip of each root. Purple nutsedge strings its tubers together in chains along the root, and they are bitter and not worth eating. Neither one is going to poison you, so this is a taste and disappointment problem and not a hospital problem. But if you are digging for the sweet one, a chain of tubers is your warning that you have got the wrong plant. And one last check to keep you honest out there. Every sedge, tiger nut included, has a stem that is solid and 3-sided. Roll a stem between your fingers, and if you feel 3 flat faces instead of a smooth round tube, you are holding a sedge and not a grass. As for taking too much, that particular worry runs backwards with this plant. This is not some rare thing you can overharvest. It grows in nearly every state in the country, and plenty of them list it as a weed they would like to see less of. Nothing endangered depends on it. If anything, the land will thank you for digging some of it up. So think back one more time to that painted wall above the Nile, and the workers measuring out little wrinkled tubers by the basket, pressing them together with honey into cones of food fit for a god. That exact same plant is still here with us. It is in the ditch behind the grocery store. It is in a cold bottle of horchata in a Valencia cafe. It is in the small, expensive bag of flour flown in from another continent. And it is on a noxious weed list with its seeds stopped at the state line. Nothing was hidden from you. The oldest superfood we can put a name to was simply too good at staying alive to stay on the menu. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the forgotten plant hiding in plain sight, then subscribe, because that is the whole reason this channel exists. And if you liked this one, YouTube thinks you are going to like the video already waiting on your screen right now, so go ahead and click it.